So thanks again for joining everybody. Today is the second qualifying for MLI Select with Accessibility webinar we're doing with Chris Stigas. Chris is a trusted partner of Peakhills, and we have funded many loans with Chris, where he's acted as the accessibility consultant signing off, and he has tons of experience negotiating with CMHC, getting into the weeds on the rules and updates. And most recently, we've had some changes to some of the definitions of what visitability means or what accessibility means at CMHC, which has impacted how we can qualify for accessibility points through MLI Select. And we wanted to have a second webinar to discuss that, as well as a general refresher for qualifying for accessibility. So Chris, why don't you introduce yourself again, and then we can take it away and begin the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Max, and thank you to everyone who took their time out of their day today to be on the call and to listen to our webinar. My name is Chris Stigas. I'm an RHFAC professional, Rick Hansen Foundation accessibility professional. I have my background is in as electrical construction for over 20 years. And I also, 10 years ago, had a spinal cord injury. So I sort of have a trifecta of knowledge to draw on when making recommendations. The lived experience, construction background, and the academic training of an RHF professional. Some of this stuff is going to be, as Max said, a little bit of a review. And then we'll get into discussions about the different changes that have come up as of late. What is an accessibility analysis? Max, if you want to go to, yeah.
There you go.
The next one there. The next slide. So the idea of an accessibility analysis is, can somebody safely arrive at your site as a pedestrian? Can they get there by municipal transit? And can they safely be dropped off by a vehicle? Then can they get into your building? Can they get meaningful information about what's offered in your building? Can they access all the floors in the building? Can they use a washroom? And then can they get out in an emergency? So the latest change is in the next slide, please, is in the CSA standards. Previously in 2020, before 2024, it was CSA B651-18, and that was a standalone volume which focused mostly in the built environment of public spaces and buildings. So your recreational centers, parking lots, and it had some mention of residential units, but it was limited to one section. In 2023, they came out with the B651-23 standard, which was implemented last year. And really, that's essentially an updated version of B651-18 with some expanded requirements for turning circles, parking spots, allowances and stalls. And removed from this standard was the residential requirements. They then created a standalone requirement for residential dwellings, and that's B652-23. So B651 is all common places, public areas and buildings, and B652, that's residential units. And it gives you further detail on room dimensions, layouts, where light controls and switches are, where they should be placed. And it also, the definition of visitable in the B652 standard is different from the CMHC interpretation. And we'll get into that in the next few slides.
Next one.
Excuse me. Next slide. So what is visitable as it pertains to MLI Select and essentially ACOP as well also has the same requirement now. This is a CMHC requirement within B652, so the residential standard. And they're specifically referencing rule number 4.4.1, which defines what an accessible path of travel is. That's the CMHC, what their interpretation is based on. So this means that there can be no step getting through the front entrance of any unit. So a person using a wheelchair needs to be able to visit every single unit. He needs to be able to get from the sidewalk through the front door of every unit. That front door needs to have an 860 millimeter clear width opening. So typically for that type of door, it's a 965 rough opening. And then by the time you put the door jambs and the door thickness, you'll be left with an 860 millimeter opening door. The washroom door, the washroom itself must be on a visitable level. So once the person rolls through the front door, the washroom needs to be on that level. You can have bedrooms that are upstairs or downstairs. Those do not need to be visitable, just the washroom and actually the living room. The washroom needs to have an outward opening style door or a pocket door. And then a 1200 millimeter path of travel from the front entrance of that unit to the washroom and to the living room. That path of travel can have a pinch in it as long as the pinch is not greater than 600 millimeters. And then the last one is a 1200 millimeters up to and in front of the toilet inside the washroom. So from the tip of the toilet bowl to the opposite wall, 1200 millimeters. In some circumstances where you might be close and you get to like 1100 or 1120 or 1130, we can use the toe clearance underneath the toilet bowl if there's room from the toilet base to the tip of the toilet. If there's some room there, 2 inches, 3 inches, 100 mil, 80 mil, as long as we can document the type of toilet and show shop drawings for that toilet and how much room is available between the base and the tip of the toilet bowl, we can use that to make up the 1200 millimeter. What's not a good fit is townhomes with stairs going up and down, up or down from the sidewalk, or townhomes that have landings once you get in the front door and there's a landing that goes up or down. And then again in Toronto now, there's a huge push for 4-plexes, 5-plexes, even 6-plexes, I think. Those typically have stairs that go up and down. Those are not a good fit either. And neither are garden suites that have a step to enter or a step to go down to the garden suite.
So Chris, where are you seeing the most challenges with this new definition of visitability? Say for standard apartment buildings, what should people look out for? Is it the washroom? Is it the width of the opening front entrance door? Like where should be people focusing? And what kind of advice can you give them based off of the feedback you're getting from CMHC?
Yeah, so the two biggest challenges right now are definitely the 1200 millimeters up to and in front of the toilet. And that's really either giving the projects a thumbs up or a thumbs down, because all the other numbers are close to code and they can be workable without drastically changing the layout or the footprint of a unit. It's the washroom size that's going to dictate what you can and can't do. So really focus on that 1200 millimeter in front of the toilet. a good idea would be to put the toilet as close as possible to the front door, and that helps solve the 1200 millimeter clear path of travel from the front door to the washroom. So if you go in through the front door and the washroom's immediately there, that helps mitigate some of the 1200. And then in terms of access to the living room would be the second, the 1200 millimeter. And keeping in mind that you can have a little pinch in that path as long as it's not greater than 600 millimeters.
And for groups that are struggling with these requirements, have there been any discussions with CMHC about this changing, or is there any insight into your discussions with CMHC that you could
Yeah, so
provide us to?
I've had multiple meetings with the, sorry, Max, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I've had multiple meetings with multiple developers and the CMHC. I've had meetings with the CSA Technical Standards Committee, the chair of the CSA Technical Standards Committee, and this is they're firm on these numbers. They do not seem to be changing, and this is what the standard is going to be moving forward. And when the new CSA standard comes out, it comes out every 5 years, so the next one will come out in 28. I'm quite sure that this will be outlined in detail of what they consider visitable. Because in the previous slide, I said that the CSA's definition of visitable differs from the CMHC interpretation. In CSA B65123, a visitable washroom is a one-to-one comparable to an accessible washroom. So that means an 1800 millimeter turning circle.
And
And
so somebody asked on that ground floor when you walk in, do you need a shower in that bathroom as well, or is it just a toilet?
just the toilet,
Okay.
just the toilet. And that's one of the distinctions is visitable does not require the shower, and it does not require the 1800 millimeter turning circle that's required in an accessible washroom, even though it's listed like that. The CMHC has deferred to an accessible path of travel, which is the rule 4.4.1, and that's what they're using to define a visitable unit. And that's where the 1200 clear path of travel and the 1200 up to and in front of the toilet comes from.
Okay.
Next slide, please, Max. And now we're going to get into some different types of units. And I've tried to make this as simple as possible and really break it down into 3 types of units. So the first type, and this is specifically speaking for Ontario and Ontario projects. BC, British Columbia Building Code also has a similar standard. But for the purposes of today, I'll be speaking about Ontario. If you have specific questions about your province, then my contact information is at the end of the presentation. I'll be happy to answer those questions. But in Ontario, 15% of the units will need to be barrier-free as per OBC. So those 15% units will be the same units that a Rick Hansen Foundation requirements will be applied to those units. These units can also be referred to as adaptable units. So the barrier-free units, they're OBC, and they're also, after you apply Rick Hansen, they're referred to as adaptable. Then the next type of unit is going to be a fully accessible unit. This unit will be one unit within the 15%. And this unit is going to have a roll-in shower, knee clearance at the kitchen sink, knee clearance at the cooktop, knee clearance at the washroom vanity. And it'll have all the items that are required in the above barrier-free units. And then the third type of unit which will be the 85%, the remaining units. The third type will be the visitable unit. And that unit will get all the things that we spoke about in the previous slide for visitable.
Okay, next slide.
Next slide.
Now this is going to be the recantant certification, but is this a review of first time around, or has it been changes as well to the recantant certification?
This is for the most part a review of last time. So these requirements are what is going to be overlaid onto the OBC units. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's the big items to sort of get your head around
Mhm.
to start including. So the wider doors, structural reinforcement, a 1500 millimeter turning circle, the type of shower fixture. I'll touch on the flooring finish to continue underneath the kitchen cabinetry for those people that are new or just to refresh. The reason that the flooring finish needs to continue underneath the kitchen cabinetry is that's what makes the unit, one of the things that makes the units adaptable. The idea is that you can use conventional kitchen cabinetry in your barrier-free unit. And if and when the time comes for somebody that has accessibility needs, they'll be able to remove the doors of the kitchen cabinet. They'll be able to remove the kick plate. And now they have knee clearance and the floor already exists underneath. You don't need to call a flooring guy. And same with the vanity in the washroom. If you need knee clearance, you can remove the doors or replace the vanity with a pedestal style sink or a standoff sink, and you won't need to call a tile setter, and quote unquote, it's adaptable. And the same reason for the structural reinforcement behind the drywall bars, but if and when a person needs to have grab bars, there's already reinforcement behind the drywall. You can just fire a couple of screws in the tile or into the drywall, and there's something there for the grab bars to grab onto. So those are the things that make those units adaptable.
I haven't had, Chris, experience with this being too challenging. Is there anything challenging that's been that you've had resistance on, or anything to note?
Yeah, one of the requirements of this is that the microwave is not mixed in with the exhaust fan. So really paying attention to that when they're uh, sourcing out appliances, to choose an exhaust fan that's just an exhaust fan, and then the microwave can go on the counter, and to remember to include a switch for that exhaust fan on the front of the kitchen cabinetry, as well as a receptacle. That's the one that we get a lot of questions or difficulty on, and the other ones are pretty much easy to install if they're considered early enough in the design phase of the project.
And if you're, say, your existing building, I'm sure it's possible to make some of the units adaptable, but the same rules of visitability apply to an existing building, and assuming that accessibility would be hard to qualify for an existing building that has that new visibility rules, because you'd have to change the layout of all the washrooms.
So yeah, for visitable existing buildings, the requirement drops from 1200 millimeters down to 1000 millimeters.
Mm.
And really everything else, yes, you could swap out doors and door frames to make them wider, but it's really that 1000 millimeter up to and in front of the toilet for the visitable units, and also in the barrier-free units, because now you're going to need to have 15% of the units be barrier-free. Those units will need to have a 1500 millimeter turning circle. So in existing, there's two things to look out for in the washrooms: the 1500 millimeter turning circle and barrier-free, and then the 1000 millimeters in the visitable units.
Okay.
It makes it quite challenging.
So we're getting some questions like, does the bedroom also need to have a turning radius? With respect to the washroom there, I believe. I think the answer is if it's on another level, no, it's just on the main level, right?
Bedrooms will need to have a turning circle if they're part of the 15% barrier-free units.
Okay.
Bedrooms do not need the turning circle if they're part of the visitable units.
Okay.
And I also want to clarify, if there's a commercial building that gets gutted down to base building and is now going to be renovated to be residential, even though the existing structure of the building exists, because of the level of new build, it's considered a new build. So that will require 1200. It cannot go under the 1000 millimeters.
Okay. Somebody asked, please give an example of a 1200 millimeter choke point.
So if you have an L style kitchen, if you can picture an L when you walk in through the front door, and the L sort of sticks or is perpendicular to the hallway going into the living room, as long as that counter, that L, is not wider than 600 mil, then that L can encroach on the path of travel from the front door to the living room.
Okay. Okay, cool. And I figured it's easier to answer questions as we go along, because some people might be dropping off by the end. But okay, we can continue here now with MLI Select Level 2 or 3 if it's still review. And just if there's any updates, let us know.
Yeah, so this is essentially just a review of last time when really I have not seen too many developers go for level 2 because of the point structure of CMHC. Most people, there's 100 points available. There's a price break of financing at 50 points. There's another price break of financing at 70 and another one at 100. So if you maximize 50 points with energy efficiency, you only need 20 points to get to 70, which is level 1. There's no real added benefit of going level 2 and achieving 30 points because there's no price break in financing at 80 points. That being said, there are developers that still want to hit this higher standard as best practice, especially if you are looking for ACLP financing. ACLP has limited funds and they're sort of looking for the best of buildings with best social outcomes. And if you can demonstrate that you've hit level 2, that'll put you ahead of other projects for funding. With MLI, that's not so much of an issue. If you hit the requirements, you get your funding. And ACLP is more limited funding.
Yeah, typically we find that you only need level 1 anyways, if you're looking to maximize number of points. And by the way,
Right.
people raising their hands, if they want to ask a question, they can ask in the chat. Also, yes, this will be circulated after the presentation via email, so you don't have to worry about taking notes.
So level 2 and 30 points is essentially all the things on the slide previously, except this time we need to raise it to 20% of the units to be barrier free. See here, they're listed as adaptable. And in that previous level, only one unit needed to be fully accessible or a proof of concept. For level 2, one unit of each variant will need to be fully accessible. So one bedroom, one 2-bedroom, one 3-bedroom. You don't need to
Okay.
do a 1-bedroom with a den, a 2-bedroom with a den. Just one 1-bedroom, one bachelor, one 2-bedroom, one 3-bedroom. Accessible parking with protected space. Hearing loop. A hearing loop lets the person on the customer side or the resident side of the desk lock in to the microphone of the person at the reception desk and cuts out all ambient noise. That's what a hearing loop is. The tactile indicators at the top of stairs, that's OBC. And one universal washroom in the building. There's one change with the universal washrooms. The requirement now for a universal washroom is 2100 millimeters, and code, depending on where you are, is 1800 or 1700. But the CSA requirement is 2100. And then a signage package that includes Braille and raised characters. We can provide examples of that, of what a complete signage package looks like if and when the project gets to that stage.
We had someone ask, what if we don't have a reception desk?
Then you don't need one.
It doesn't
You can
apply.
think of, it does not apply. It's really anywhere that there's an exchange of information. You can think about including one if the building offers an office amenity space or a presentation room or somewhere where somebody will be doing public speaking. That's a good idea for a hearing loop.
Okay.
Okay. Excuse me. Next slide, please. These are some examples of a fully accessible kitchen with measurements. As Max said, this is going to be circulated later. You can review the drawings. One of the benefits of going with the Rick Hansen certification is that if you don't hit these numbers exactly, we score things on a sliding scale of 0 to 5. So you can get 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 5 on your scorecard and still pass. That'll allow you to do better in some areas, not so good in some areas, even potentially get 0 out of 5 in some areas and still reach a 60% passing score of your report. Next slide. So this is a little change from the last time. This is a fully accessible kitchen and what it looks like. You have your refrigerator on the left with the freezer on the bottom. What we don't want is the freezer on top. You can also have parallel doors for your refrigerator and freezer. And this time I've circled the switch. That switch controls the exhaust fan. So you can turn it on and off. That's the first circle beside the refrigerator. Then you see what a roll-in cooktop looks like. This was a brand new unit. It's missing the gable to hide that wire. So it's not 100% finished yet. Then the second circle by the sink, that's a receptacle, which also needs to be at the front of the cabinetry. And then you have your stove there.
And this is an example of a 15% adaptable.
This is an example of a fully accessible. So only one unit for level 1, only one unit will need to have the knee clearance, but all the units will need to have a refrigerator like this and an exhaust fan like this.
All units will need to have that switch.
That switch, that receptacle, an exhaust fan, and the refrigerator. Only the proof of concept will need the knee clearance at the sink and at the cooktop.
Okay.
Next slide. More of a review. This is the same unit. They did a great job. This is the proof of concept unit with a roll-in shower. They have the fold-down bench and all the grab bars mounted. The only problem here is that they've mounted the shower fixture too far away from the seat. So just something that was missed. If you're putting a fold-down seat, the shower fixture needs to be on the long wall and reachable by the person that's sitting on that seat. So this is a miss. This is something that was scored a 0 out of 5, but ultimately was still allowed to pass because we, as I said, score things on a sliding scale.
Okay.
Excuse me. On the right, is a stackable washing machine. The controls are too high in the stackable washing, so this is not a good fit. A good fit, you can have a stackable washer dryer, but the controls need to be in the middle. And on the next slide, I'll show you an example of that. So you can see the one on the left, the controls are in the middle, and also on the bottom for the washing machine, they're touch controls. And the unit in the middle has touch controls for both in the middle. And then again, the unit on the right has controls for the washer in the middle, but the dryer is up high, so that's not a good fit.
Okay.
And then another, again, a recap. This is just wayfinding, and something as simple as a coat of green paint around an emergency door can really make it stand out and help people find where the exit is. If you can picture no lights, chaos, some smoke, a fire, you need to be able to identify where the exits are. Quick and a simple coat of paint for contrast really helps with that. Next slide. This is a hotel in Niagara Falls. I think it's the Hilton, and they've done a really great job with wayfinding. They've incorporated these stripes into the terrazzo, into the marble, and at first glance, it might look as like a decorative finish, but really, if you follow these lines, there's no tactile surface to them, but it's strictly visual. But if you follow them, they lead you directly to the elevators, and they also lead you directly to the reception desk. So a form of wayfinding developed into an artistic finish. Next slide, please. Just a recap again, just some easy wins that are not requirements, but things to think about when you're at the design meeting with your designers. Make sure the building's easy to visit, to identify from the street. So big numbers, 13 York Street, great big sign, easy to see. Contrasting colors, so no white floors on white walls and white doors and white door frames. A mirror in the back of the elevator. Switching flat handrails to round handrails, making it easy for people to grab that have limited hand strength. The elevator floor, a lighter color than a dark color. People with vision loss sometimes perceive a dark floor with as a whole. And then a signage package. And that can, a sample of that can be provided upon request and when your project gets to that stage. And then a really common one, especially after COVID, there's a huge push for people to use wave sensors. We recommend against wave sensors. They're hard for people with vision loss to identify, and they seem to not work more than they work. So we recommend a vertical column bar. It's about 3 feet long, and people can bump into it with their knee, their hip, if they're carrying packages, with their elbow, to carrying a child. So it's better for everybody across the board. Last slide. Next slide, Max. Max?
You went on my end. Yep.
Yeah. So this is just a recap of the processes and timelines of going through the program and what kind of timeline you should. It's going to take somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks to get through the whole process. There is an adjudication, or we need about 2 weeks to do our work, and then the Rick Hansen Foundation needs about 4 weeks to do their work. I'm not going to go through it line by line, but you can review it here. I'd like to circle back to the visitable and see what questions people have.
Yeah, sure. So I had a bunch of questions come in. Some of them related to different provinces, and I urge those listeners, if they want to reach out to us or Chris directly, We can have those specific for BC as opposed to Ontario. I can read this question out here. It's a technical one. Chris, we'll see if you know how to respond. For quote unquote visible bathroom criteria, where does MLI bathroom radius / clearance areas from what's listed in B65123 under section 5.9, which requires an 1800 millimeter turning radius? This presentation notes that the 1200 millimeter clearance for toilet is acceptable. I think need some clarity around 1800 versus 1200 millimeter clearance.
Yeah, so part of that question was breaking up, so I couldn't hear it in its entirety. But I think what is being asked is in regards to the 1800 millimeter that's referenced in the CSA visitable and the CMHC 1200. And that's what I was talking about in the slide, that the interpretation of visitable within CSA is different than the interpretation of CMHC. In CSA, it says that visitable washrooms must have 1800. The CMHC has said that that is not what they're looking for. They're actually looking for a 1200 millimeter path of travel and 1200 millimeters up to and in front of the toilet.
Mhm.
Where is that listed exactly? Where are those words? It's not in there anywhere. But based on the work that we've done and files that have come back from the CMHC, this is our experience as to what they've been looking for. They have said that they will come out with a clarification or a notice or a bulletin, but as of yet, they have not come out, at least anywhere that I could find or anybody that I've spoken to, that says how to apply the 1200 to visitable units. So you have to trust the process that we've been through, that this is what they're looking for.
Yeah, you got to ask the experts.
Yeah.
So somebody else asked for the one accessible per variant requirement, is it based on bedrooms? So do you need one accessible unit for a 2-bedroom, for a 1-bedroom, and a 3-bedroom? Or is it just one accessible unit for any bedroom type per building?
For level 1, it's 1 unit of any variant. For level 2, it's one bedroom, 1 2-bedroom, 1 3-bedroom, 1 bachelor, whatever combination you have, 1 of each.
Okay. For the fully accessible unit, is the counter height at 36 inches or lower?
So again, even for that unit, that's something that we can score on a sliding scale of 0 to 5. So it can be 36. You're just not going to get full points. You'll get 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 5. If you bring it down to, I have to check, but I think it's 32 or 33. I have to check what that is in millimeters. You can get full marks, but even if it's at 36, it's still possible, even in the fully accessible unit. Yeah.
Somebody else asked, if you're adding units to an older building, how does it all apply? Well, it just makes it more challenging because you have to still qualify the same way. I think we answered that before. What are the key accessibility differences between Quebec and Ontario? And do you guys do consulting for developers in BC? The answer is yes. Chris, you'd have to reach out directly to Chris.
Sorry, Max, go ahead.
No, I was saying you would speak to them directly about the differences between the provinces.
Yeah, one big thing between Quebec is that in Quebec, all the units are deemed adaptable, every single one, whereas in Ontario, only 15% are deemed adaptable. And I think in BC, they've recently changed this, and BC, all of the units are also 100% adaptable.
Okay.
But you can reach out to me for more specifics based on those provinces.
Um, I think was the picture shown of the kitchen an example fully accessible or adaptable? That was fully accessible. Um,
That was fully accessible, and the refrigerator and range hood style need to be applied to adaptable.
okay. I think the rest of the questions can be answered when we share the presentation. So that'll go out next week. So watch out for your email inboxes for a copy of this presentation. Again, you guys can reach out to myself or your Peakhill rep or Chris directly. We'll make sure to help you guys out. But yeah, I think we can give everyone 15 minutes of their days back. Um, Chris, thank you so much. Always a pleasure, and I hope we can continue hammering out these changes with CMHC. And look, if it impacts the viability of qualifying through accessibility, then I think CMHC will eventually notice and and make some changes, as they always do. They're always continuing to make changes. So all that means is continue to interact with the experts and figure out what CMHC is looking for, because only Chris knows. So talk to him.
Thanks, Max. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.